First, thank you all for being here. I am really honored to help Josh and to continue the conversation about digital citizenship. First, I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'll let the panel introduce themselves as well. We'll just go down the line if that works for you guys. We can share who you are, what you do, and then something interesting about yourself that other people will probably not know. All right? So my name is Jeff Dunn. I work for Google. I'm the Global Outreach and Education Manager, and so I run a global team facilitating a ton of events similar to this in all shapes and sizes in literally all continents except Antarctica, TBD. So we help with digital citizenship, online safety, cyberbullying, how to best use our products to stay safe online, and how to avoid, phishing attempts and that kind of fun stuff. So I am by no means the on-the-ground expert that these folks are, so I am excited to have them introduce themselves as well.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Clayton Clayton. I'm a sergeant for the Orange County Sheriff's Department. I'm also the owner of Total Safety Solutions and the author of Parenting a Digital World. For about 5 years, I was a juvenile investigator as a school resource officer and also on the school threat assessment team, assessing anytime a weapon or a threat of violence shows up at a school, which often those threats are happening online. And so I'm very, very happy to be here with you today, and I do a lot of education for parents and students throughout the United States. And you want to know something?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what I should say here, other than in addition to doing this kind of thing, I also work with an organization in Cambodia. I go to Cambodia for a couple of weeks every year, where they specifically go out and rescue girls who are sold into sex trade there, and then have various treatments to get them back and back in the community safely.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Hello, my name is Marty, and I work for the Montebello Police Department. I am the training and recruitment sergeant for Montebello. I'm also the social media manager for the department. I tell people that I should have been a millennial because I've been on social media since everybody could, and I'm on every platform there is. So something funny or something to know about me, I guess it's not funny. I teach law enforcement social media, so social media for law enforcement. We have a company called lawenforcement.social, and we have a podcast. So we talk about online anything related with law enforcement that you guys might do in the civilian world, so that we can translate it for law enforcement and teach people how to connect with our community. On top of that, we sometimes will do a show where you might catch us talking about real world law enforcement stuff. My partner, Mike Byers, who's actually in the next room, we have no problems with answering questions about anything in law enforcement. We try to be as transparent as possible, so that's who I am.
Your bonus thing?
That was my bonus.
Oh,
that was my bonus. Yeah.
My bonus sucks.
Well, it was hard to follow after Clayton.
I know, and I love Cambodia too, so that's awesome what you're doing. My name is McCaleb. I work for PlayStation. I'm in charge of the security operations there, security operations center. Basically, if you think about it, is a big room, and we're trying to stop bad guys, hackers, and fraudsters, which there's no shortage of. My bonus thing is I've been to Cambodia a number of times. I love it there, and I used to be a stand-up comic many, many years ago. Thankfully for you and me, per YouTube.
That's the next session.
Exactly.
That's great. I'm Dr. Adam Pletter. I'm a clinical psychologist out of Bethesda, Maryland. Flew in last night. Happy to be here. In addition to running a full-time private practice in Maryland, I began a company a couple years ago called iParent 101, where I do digital parenting workshops, teaching parents how to manage their children's digital lives, helping their children learn to be safe, savvy users themselves. I'm also a parent myself, so it's sort of, has come out of that, both managing my own parenting at home and the day-long working with lots and lots of families struggling through this. I am a Nats fan, so congratulations to all you Dodgers fans out there. It was a rough night last night, but go Cubs. And I'm, again, very happy to be here.
Good morning. My name is David Billet. I am an instructional technology specialist with Los Angeles Unified School District, the second largest district in the nation. My job is mainly working with schools, their leadership teams and teachers to help them integrate technology safely and responsibly to meet their instructional goals. And as we say in LUSD, other duties as assigned.
Awesome. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to ask each individual a question. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of this, so just know that. But also, I want to make sure everybody knows, please raise your hand if you have a question for one of the panelists. We don't want to have shouting and interruption, which you don't seem like that rowdy a crowd just yet. But again, as they're talking, if you do have a related question, now is your chance. Now is your opportunity to talk to these folks. And they have a lot of in-depth experience that I want you to learn from. So with that being said, that's sort of one of the key learning outcomes I want to have for this event, or this panel, I should say, is to learn something from these people that you would not normally learn of. So you don't really talk to police officers, hopefully too often, unless you're in a positive light, but if you're pulled over all the time. So that kind of thing. Make sure you learn as much as you can from these people and ask questions. Thanks. All right, so we did a little background research ahead of time, and Clayton, your advice to parents is, quote, invest in your child's digital world now. There's too much at stake not to. Could you be a little bit more specific about how they invest?
Sure. Well, I, as a juvenile investigator, was getting tired of having students in my office who either were victims or of a situation or maybe made a bad choice, and they always said the same thing to me, was I didn't know this could happen to me, or I didn't know these were the consequences, or a parent in that same situation say, I didn't know this could happen to my kid. So as soon as your child has the access to the internet, we as parents need to step in and create safe boundaries for them, so that, because a lot of the things that they're being exposed to are happening unintentional, and then there's some other intentional things happening. They're being exposed to inappropriate content like pornography, or they're being exposed to strangers who want to exploit your children. So what I suggest parents do is, especially parents who didn't grow up in a digital age, didn't grow up with social media, but don't be afraid. Look for opportunities, whether your school provides some kind of education for parents. I do that through my website, cybersafetycop.com, and educate yourself and do what kids do, which is they just get in there and they start kicking tires, right? They're not afraid to press a button and see what happens next. And I think that's what maybe the biggest drawback for people in our generation is, that we're afraid, like, what do I do if I press this button? Download the apps that your kid wants to download and look at them, or go to my website, go to commonsensemedia.org and get good reviews, or even Josh's website. Look at the reviews and say, is this appropriate for my child? And so that's going to be that hands-on is going to be the same thing you're going to be doing when your child wants to go to their friend's house. Who's that family? What are they going to get exposed to there? Same thing with the internet. Where's my child going in the internet, and what are they going to be exposed to, and what do I need to do to help keep them safe?
I like it. Yeah, don't be afraid to try it out. So Mark, next question. Where do you draw the line in the sand? So let's say, God forbid, a parent's child is getting cyberbullied and they don't feel like it's an emergency that they need to call 911 immediately for, but when do they get in touch with the police for something like that, or sexual exploitation, that kind of topic?
So my suggestion, and what I tell parents and people that come to our Facebook page, is get the police involved right away. A lot of times parents will come to us and say, well, my kid was receiving tweets or getting messages on Instagram about this. Okay, great, where are those messages? Oh, well, they deleted them. Well, what do you mean they deleted them? Well, because they knew that we were looking, or that we were watching. So obviously we take cyberbullying very seriously, and what's big now as well is school shootings and threats. And so we encourage parents and the professionals in schools to get us involved right away, however slight the problem may be, because it may be something that we could actually nip in the bud before it gets to be something big. So parents need to get involved right away, or get us involved right away.
Gotcha. Any questions about that? Okay. Again, feel free, raise your hand. So next question about PlayStation and passwords. That seems a little bit relevant. So what are some like ongoing trends that you're seeing in terms of passwords, online security? What should parents and educators in this room right now sort of take home as best practices?
Well, it is one of the most important things in the internet to me. You know, obviously I have a little different slant than these gentlemen. I'm more worried about security and fraud. And protecting your online identity is critical, because someone can access your online identity and post things as you. We've seen a lot of cases where that has done irreparable damage. And by the way, this applies to kids and adults and teachers. You've seen teachers literally lose their jobs over a post from our vacation on Facebook. So one of the things that I like to recommend is, first of all, use a password manager. One that's very simple and inexpensive is called LastPass. There's plenty of others. But the nice thing about that LastPass is it works across all of your devices. It works on Android, iPhone, your Mac, or Windows. And so you can keep all of that passwords in place. Have a unique password for each site. This is really important, and why a password manager is important is what we see a lot, especially in PlayStation, and it's fraud, but you see it in a lot of other places, is where, you know, maybe you're on a blog, you know, you're a bowling league or something, and you just happen to use the same email address and password for that bowling league as you do your Bank of America or whatever account, or PlayStation in our case. You'd be amazed how many people do that because they just don't want to remember 400 different passwords. So as an example, when we have little hidden sneaky things that go across the internet and look for hacked sites, and we pull all the email addresses that have been hacked and then run them against the PlayStation database, and if they also have a PlayStation account with that same email, we'll reset their password. So that's why you want to have unique passwords, and it's just too many to keep up with these days, so a password manager is good. The other thing is, if use passphrases, and I think I presented a couple years ago on this and got into an argument with somebody in the audience. Passphrases are actually infinitely more secure than passwords. I know a lot of you may have heard that, you know, replacing the letter A with the @ symbol or an L with an exclamation point. The hackers are way ahead of that. They've incorporated that into the password cracking code. So you use a passphrase and you use like 3 or 4 words that have nothing to do with each other, like Rose, Crocodile, Texas.
Don't give away your password.
Yeah. Oh. Now I got a note to self: change all passwords. It's oddly enough infinitely more complicated to crack, and it offers great protection. But if you combine that with a password manager, and I know I'm going over real quick, but just one additional thing: if you think about it from a physical security standpoint, so somebody wants to rob somebody. So they're going to drive down a street and they see 5 houses. One house, really dark, big high hedges, pile of mail out front. House next door has lights, motion to sensor lights, you know, big alarm company sign on the front. Who are they going to go after? They're going to go after the easier target. If somebody wants to go after you, they're going to get you. What you want to do is be a more difficult target by creating a more complicated password, and doing things like not using the same password for each site. I'll shut up now.
That's great, thanks. Okay, so moving on, I have sort of another sort of line in the sand kind of question. So in our prep work for this panel, we were discussing, or at least online, best practices that these folks know about, and one of them was parents should take control of their child's, you know, online safety and online livelihood, essentially. Where is that line in the sand? Like how, not only where should they take control, but how?
Right, so in my practice, I teach parents, even before the iPhone came out, to look at the parental controls, not to take over necessarily, but to be empowered as the parent, like any other parenting decision, to be in charge of what your children, from young, it's getting younger and younger as we probably all know, to be in charge, to be in control over what your children are being exposed to, as we've already been talking about, and Josh started the whole conference this morning with a very scary list of apps that are very real and very out there in that red zone. So in terms of best practices, you know, it's really about a balance. You know, you have to pick battles. You can't just lock everything down. You're not going to throw, you know, every device that you might have in a drawer and not let your kid have it, but to be aware of what your children are doing. And from my point of view, I go through the nuts and bolts in my workshop to show parents how to set up things like family sharing, which is built into the Apple devices. And I focus on Apple mostly because that's what most kids have: iPhones, iPads, iPod touches. So built into the iOS devices are, a decent, they've gotten better in the last couple of years, array of parental controls. And again, it's not about locking it down. It's about being proactive. All day long in my office, I hear parents saying, "Oh, but I trust my kid. We don't really need to set up that kind of stuff." And that's great. I'm very happy that to trust our kids. That's the whole point. Eventually, your kids are going to be off on their own, and they're going to have to manage themselves. So it's really about being able to be proactive, not reactive. Just like any other parenting decision, when you were, installing the car seat, to take your child home from the hospital when they were born. I remember going to the police station to make sure it was locked down tight enough. It was tight, it was fine, but I remember as an anxious parent at the beginning, the very beginning, wanting to make sure that my child would be safe. And in many ways, in my opinion, the internet is not that different. It's just another, more complicated parenting landscape. So trying your best to be in charge of that is really the key. And so I mentioned family sharing before, just 10 seconds more. Once that's set up, the child has to ask permission to download the app. So all of those red zone apps, chances are, would not be on your child's app because you guys would have a dialogue about that, which is really the point. Not to say no, but what I say is yes when. Yes, if you want this app, eventually you're going to have it. But, at your age, not yet, or once you demonstrate more appropriate behavior. The want to have these things are developmentally appropriate. These children are not asking for things that, they shouldn't be asking for necessarily. It makes sense. They want to connect. It's no different than when we were on the phone with the cord wrapped around the dining room wall. It's the same need. So that's where the line is for me, to be proactive.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, of course.
Just add one quick thing. There's a lot of, what he's talking about is an awesome technology with Apple. There's others too, and there's one that if you're looking for a low cost or free solution, OpenDNS has a solution called Family Something Family. Family Time, Family, I don't know. Family is in it.
Something family.
But they have a free service, and the nice thing about that is you can set, it's very simple for non-tech people to figure out, set the DNS settings on the computer, on the iPads, on the phones, and it will all route through OpenDNS, and then OpenDNS will block things. And then they have a paid service, which is, I believe, about $20 a year, where you can actually get a lot more granular, whitelist certain things, blacklist certain things, and also you can see a report of where your kids are going. And that includes whether they're using the phone, tablet, or laptop. Sorry.
Yeah, you in the front seat. No, it's okay.
No, I just want to make sure, and that would work also for Android devices as well?
Yeah, anything that connects to the internet.
Okay.
Now, caveat, big asterisk here, somebody who's pretty tech savvy can figure out a way around it, but it will do its job.
Doesn't that also go into the whole trust thing? If we're supposed to be trusting our students and going with them, why would we do that?
That's this guy's. I'm a security dude.
Why would you?
Why would you get the OpenDNS thing? If you're supposed to trust your student, trust your child or your student, we're in education up here. How does that circumvent the trust? Because if you're not trusting them.
Well, it's not about not trusting them. It's, as you just listened to that whole list of red zone apps, from a young age, kids want more. They're going to test limits. So I would say for the parent to be aware of what the child is downloading is step one, and have that dialogue back and forth. And if you don't want your child to have that, like any other parenting decision, do you trust your 4-year-old to walk across the street? Your 4-year-old's not going to step in front of a car on purpose, but you trust them, but you're going to want to set some type of control proactively. You're going to hold their hand. You might even pick them up if it's a crowded street. So it's really about setting up some dialogue where you can communicate with your child to set up that they have to talk to you about what they want to do. And then, once, so the trust basically grows as you guys are talking more and more, and they could demonstrate appropriate behavior.
The OpenDNS solution is used by hundreds of school districts too, so it is very commonly used. I was a teenager once; I would not have trusted me. So,
Yeah, and just to add, we're dealing with teens, as you know, as an educator, their brains are not biologically adapt to making good choices. Sometimes never, but at least their brains aren't fully developed there, and so it's like putting guardrails on a road, right? We want everybody to stay in their lane to be safe, and OpenDNS I use it. It's fantastic, and it's going to prevent the inadvertent exposure to inappropriate content, especially pornography, that we know with 4 years of research has a horrible impact on our children's brains. We have in high schools doing research that there are these rape myths that are being promulgated largely through pornography that they're watching, that they think there might be situations where a girl could be held down and forced to have sex. Like these are beliefs that our teens have, being promulgated through pornography and other things that they're being exposed to. So they may not be going there to have that experience. It's going to happen to them if we don't shut that completely off to them. And I heard a psychologist say, you can't underestimate the impulsivity of a teenager, and they're looking for that experience, which is going to be exciting to them, but ultimately could be dangerous.
Great. Any follow-up questions? No? Okay. Yeah.
I just have a question about, so the mistakes are going to happen due to the teen brain and due to the access. So I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but what would be your advisement when the mistakes happen, not if, because we know they're going to happen?
are you talking to me?
The psychologist.
Okay. The smart guy.
So your question is what to do when the mistakes happen?
Right. So I've been an administrator for the last 15 years at the junior high level, so I see it all day long. So it's not if the mistakes are going to happen. Even with this awesome stuff in place, from a psychological standpoint, knowing the teen brain isn't developed, what would be your advisement?
Right. So
when do they happen?
Right, so I would start with repeating what Clayton said earlier, that the prefrontal cortex of the brain is not developed. This is not something where it's abnormal. So the impulsivity, is built in to all teenagers, and that's perfectly normal development. What I have seen in my office, and to your question, you take I know we were going to talk about this later, but you talk about Musical.ly, which is a very popular app. I think it was in the gray zone in Josh's list this morning. There's pretty robust parental controls there. So what I would recommend, if there was a problem, and typically the problem would come up if the parent and child did not have that dialogue ahead of time, the child's doing it on their own, which is what I've seen in my office, and then some mistake happens, some stranger contacts them, asks for pictures, some type of harassment might occur. Even if it seems innocent, it could overwhelm the child depending on how young they are. And so from my point of view, what you would do is talk with them. You want to build the trust, to your question earlier, through that dialogue, and then set the controls so the child feels secure moving forward. The child might decide not to use that app for a while, but the bottom line is that you want to have the controls in place so the child can feel secure. The basis of all anxiety is the unknown. I have to protect myself from something that might harm me, that might scare me, that again is a normal developmental or biological thing in all of us. So when we're feeling overwhelmed or traumatized by a mistake, you want to, basically put the controls in place where the child feels safe and they can move forward slowly and rebuild their own trust, that I feel confident in myself, that I know what I'm doing over time, and that the parent is having that ongoing dialogue with them.
and dealing with I have a 13 and a 15-year-old, 2 boys who love technology, and but one of the issues that I try to work with parents on is getting over this issue that students don't feel safe to ask for help, because you can do all the parental controls. I tell you, you have parental controls locked down in your house, your kid's going to go to this friend's house, and that's not happening over there. Mm-hmm. So, and statistically, we know that 9 out of 10 kids who are being abused online will not go to parents for help. So how do we get over that hump? And basically is creating a situation where, like in my contract that I do with students, or I'll talk more about this in my breakout session, but hey, you're a kid, you're going to make mistakes, and that's how we learn. That is okay. If you do something that you know that me as your parent would not be happy about, but if you come to me immediately, as soon as you possibly can, and ask for help, I'm going to help you. I'm not going to give you discipline. Okay, so I want to make a safe, an opportunity for grace, right? It's an amnesty there. But hey, if I find out later that you had an opportunity to tell me and you didn't, then there's going to be the consequences, and those consequences are laid out beforehand, and so they understand what's at stake. I want my kid to feel, and this has worked out actually quite well with my son, who is now discovering, puberty and all the other issues that a 15-year-old is experiencing, and just some honest mistakes that are happening. And he's coming and say, "Hey, Dad, I was doing a search for this game that I really like, and I know we have Safe Search turned on Google, but this image came up, and I know you're not going to be happy about it. Let me just tell you about it right now." And honestly, I probably would never have figured that out, but he came to me, but that came out of this understanding that we created. And I think parents need to, and that's part of the engaging, right? You need to engage your kid and make that a safe avenue for your kids. Yeah.
Just a follow-up question. The thing that I'm hoping to learn, I'm a director of health and wellness at a private school in LA, and I don't know if this is maybe for Officer Mark or whomever, but really the difference between, because often, especially at a private school, we get parents coming to us and say, do something. This happened between 2 of our students off campus, but they were 2 of our students. Mm-hmm. And the line is so shifting because we're kind of, we're a private entity, and so sometimes we make it up as we go. Sometimes we are getting better at really having boundaries, but it's unclear as to what should be our business and what shouldn't be, and we always want to empower our parents to do their job and not have us be their parent. So I'm curious about if any of the panelists have experience in this and how they advise private schools specifically on how to manage any kind of cyber situation that does not happen on the campus.
Right. Well, I was a school resource officer for several years, and I had 18 schools in my city. I was the only SRO, and I had a major private high school in Orange County, as well as other schools, private and public. And actually, the private school has has more leeway in as much that they can create policies for their students, and their student handbook saying, in addition to all the other kind of school policies, but if you go online and you represent the school in a negative way, that can be something that the school can discipline for that maybe a public school couldn't. So actually private schools have, but you know what, the school to me is really the hub, right? The hub for the community, it's the hub for families. And so it makes a lot of sense for parents to come there and say, hey, both of these kids are at this school, there's an issue going on. Yeah, it doesn't have maybe it's not directly, about the school necessarily. And I think part of the problem for schools is that you feel like, okay, maybe we can handle this, but then that's not really what you're there for, right? You're there to educate, but also this thing could blow up at school, and it could have a school issue coming out of it as well, because everything comes back to the school. I don't care if it's during the summer, the first day of school is happening at the school. So that's why I think reaching out to families, I felt like as a school resource officer, 80%, maybe more, of the issues that I was seeing could have been handled by a parent at the parent level. It didn't have to come to the school. So I think the schools are kind of that hub. They should, and whether working with having your own cyber safety program, having an SRO who can do a parent ed night and reaching out to parents and saying, this is our partnership piece. You have the school, you have the SRO, and you have the parent, and let's kind of make this kind of triangulation of protection the kids in the middle. But yeah, you're going to be saddled with those issues, and maybe it's not something that you can discipline for, but you're going to have to work it out because, right.
That kid gone.
Right. Well, you have the educational code, and the educational code is kind of specific about what you can and can't do, and if it impacts the school with regards to the educational experience, then that kind of breaches some of that free speech issues that students really don't have, right? That it kind of, there's an issue there. So safe school campus trumps that kind of stuff. So unfortunately, administrators are spending more and more time tackling these issues when I think we can really get parents in there. I do education for students, and I'm just hoping I'm getting through that their little teen brain and get past the hormones and get in there, because you give them the education, hopefully they're going to make a good decision, but the parent, I think, needs to be brought into this scenario.
Yeah, most definitely.
Just to add to that, I was a school resource officer as well, and I responded to a call at one of our private high schools. It was a cyberbullying issue on Twitter, and the important thing for me was, number one, knowing Twitter, because when I pulled the student in who was doing the cyberbullying, and it wasn't specifically being done at school because I could see what time the tweets were being sent out, but a student brings you an issue, so you have to deal with it. So along with what Clayton was saying is, I would get law enforcement involved right away, and it could just be a simple mediation thing. And in this case specifically, I got to speak to both the students, and I, first of all, I talked to the violator, quote unquote, and said, hey, are you sending tweets? Oh no, not me. Really? What are these? And they're like, oh, she's like, oh, okay, now I know I can't pull the wool over her eyes. So I spoke to both of them. We mediated it. We brought the parents in, and they were happy with the whole mediation. And then school they dealt with it their own way. But there wasn't anything criminal at the time, but just the fact that I was there to mediate and to educate parents, and as well as educate the students, to the extent of what could have happened to her if she would have escalated, or and just getting us involved sometimes is enough to help mediate and deal with the issue. But if you're not sure, I always say, when in doubt, just call.
So, clearly what I'm hearing here is that the school's responsibility does not stop at the front gate. So, building on what Dr. Pletter was saying, there are ways to trust, but we want to, as Donald Rumsfeld once said, trust but verify. This does not reflect my political leanings, by the way. But that's something we need to do. And, I'm hearing also about technical solutions and filters and such. Every time I walk into a campus, this is the same question I hear over and over again. How come there are not filters? Pardon me. How come there are not filters in place? What can we do? How could I see what my kids are doing on one screen? And there really are no technical solutions here. Like we like to say, the best filter is the human filter. And this all starts with digital citizenship. And having a plan for digital citizenship at the classroom level, the school level, the district level, is a way to prevent these incidents from happening, or at least be able to manage them and increase awareness and work towards solutions.
And just one last thing on that. Remember, your children and your students are probably smarter than you are when it comes to social media or just technology. A lot of us in here probably weren't born, or when we were born, we didn't have iPads and iPhones and stuff to play with. Nowadays, kids are born with technology in their hands. So if you develop that relationship with them that everyone's talking about, that'll help, because I tell you what, they're probably smarter than you and will, out-trump you, especially with video games, right?
The proactive stance versus waiting for the mistakes, the problems, they're still going to happen, but it's trying to move to a less reactive stance in parenting and when it comes to schools. Again, cyberbullying is harassment. So, when it crosses that line, as you were saying, whatever the school policy is, getting law enforcement involved, I would say is the best policy as early as possible. But it is harassment. That's what cyberbullying is.
Yeah.
Can I jump on that? The whole, they're smarter. I would like to, I look at it as more like they're braver, like you said, they'll push buttons and they'll dive in, but then they don't have that prefrontal cortex, so they will make those dumb, poor choices, or they won't think before they send that email or forward that spam or whatever it is. So I think, I don't know that they're smarter.
Well,
I think at the high school, especially towards the high school, they definitely are more savvy, and they will figure out the hacks and the this and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so opening that dialogue, I think, is important. But I think the the digital citizenship, the consequences part, the future, like what does it mean if those tweets escalate? What's criminal? What can go on the record? Like that's the part that they are not, I think, often going to care about, right? And that's our part, right? It's like
We all want to see. Go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a brand new app coming out that I'm aware of called Raccoon with 2 Ks. I think it's still under development, but it's in the App Store. And what Raccoon does is it doesn't stop the teen or the child from sending out a tweet, but it gives the child an alert that this may be inappropriate, and simultaneously it sends the parent an alert, the same exact alert saying your child may be sending something inappropriate. And so it doesn't stop anything. And it monitors sort of live, but from my point of view, the reason I'm sharing it with you all is because I love this idea, because in theory, it should teach the child to pause, to think, am I going to have to talk to my dad about this later? And if so, to get that, some impulse control there, which is hard for all teenagers and many of us in the room. So it's Raccoon. Again, I don't work for them, but it's a brand new app that should be in the App Store right now. And again, I'm sorry? R-A-K-K-O-O-N, Raccoon with Ks.
I also wanted to point out the White House has a site called Stop Think Connect, which has similar kind of tips.
Yep.
I don't know if they mentioned Raccoon, of course.
It's literally brand new, so
Well, I was just going to touch on one of the points that you made that I disagree with is if somebody posts something that's illegal or is going to be on their record, everything you post is on your record.
Right, well, yeah.
Yeah, and I want
They don't always.
Yeah.
They're not given explicit digital citizenship training and discussions. They don't always.
It's hard because at that age, you're not, you can't even think about tomorrow, much less something that might affect you 5 years. There's a real quick example, and this goes back to the 90s, like the pre-internet days. A buddy of mine did a radio show as part of a NPR program called The Savvy Traveler. It was called the Weird Museum Tour or something like that. So this was like early 90s, and I went with him on a couple to be the quote-unquote man on the street. And one of them was the Museum of Burlesque, which is like 15 miles off the 15 freeway in the middle of Bakersfield or something, run out of some woman's house. I signed the guest book with ink. 10, 12 years later, apparently, at some point during that period, they had digitized it. So by signing the guest book, I've given my right to use my name. So all of a sudden, I walk into a job interview, and the guy says, so tell me about the stripper museum. I was like, what the? I had to think for a minute, and then went, oh, he's talking about the museum. I didn't get the job, and that was just, one small example. Everything you put out there is there forever. And as we're learning in the presidential race, delete does not mean delete. So even things like Snapchat, even things like, and I wasn't getting political there, that's just the technical reality. When you delete something off your computer, it's still there, and that's the same with if you delete a Twitter. So anything you put on social media is going to come back and haunt you. And it will come to a point where, as a company, especially working in security, we have to do significant background checks on anybody we employ, where it's going to be a massive digital background check. That's already the case, but it's even going to be more pronounced.
Real quick, just one last thing. When I say that some children are smarter than us, they're smarter than the average parent. They're not necessarily smarter than the people in this room, because there's a reason why you're here. But the average parent who doesn't know about technology, they're definitely smarter than them.
We're actually getting ready to teach a digital citizenship class to our school. Can you go a little bit more into the massive digital background checks? What specifically? So when I create this lesson, I can be telling them, hello, you need to be watching out for this, because companies are looking at this.
I mean, there's no end to the scope. I mean, it's anything that's out there, and it's not just Google. I mean, everything that you put out there is digitally indexed. I mean, unless you're doing stuff on the dark web or the deep web. So it's all there, and it's not that difficult to search. Your name is attached to it. Trying to think of a good example. If you use a pseudonym on one website and you use the same pseudonym on another website, and that other website shows your email address, suddenly there's now lying to you. There's one of the dangerous things about the internet is that there's this false sense of anonymity that actually does not exist. We deal with law enforcement all the time, all the way to the FBI, Homeland Security, that kind of stuff. They can trace you. Yeah. So this perception that I'm going to say something mean about somebody, or I'm going to say something socially unacceptable or whatever out there, nobody's everybody's going to know, it can come back to you. And when you're dealing with a teenager that's not thinking about the job interview that they're going to be doing, and just like me going to the Museum of Burlesque as a favor to a friend and losing a job because apparently I went to a stripper museum, it's a humorous anecdote, but it just shows how. So I'm long-winded there, but basically there's no end to that scope. It's not going to be like we're only going to check Facebook, because and you guys know as well, when you get into my line of work, you often have to get security clearances, and man, they go everywhere. They check the lint in your belly button pretty much.
So I think this kind of, we're getting to, I think, the central issue here, which is for teens and social media or the internet, it seems fundamentally unfair, right? Because we have teens who are impulsive. They're not very good at empathy, right? You're throwing a screen between them. There's not another human being there. They went home that day because a kid made fun of their new tennis shoes, and they're thinking about it, and they just vomit that whatever's going on in their head around the screen. They're hitting the send button. They're not thinking about the consequences to themselves, to the person. And now how do kids learn? They learn by mistakes, but they can't take it back. The first choice, the only choice that they get to make is really that first choice, which is whether I hit the send button or not, and they don't get to hit the rewind button after they do that. I had a student who was angry, posted that he was the teacher that suspended him for that one day. Actually, the school suspended him, but the teacher who referred him, he goes home, posts something on Instagram about her, and basically there's a threat. He's like, I wish I could cut her. I'm so angry, right? And that's a crime. And so I was called out to investigate it. This student, who had no intention of ever hurting this teacher, makes a statement. He was blowing off steam, but now his one-day suspension turned into a 5-day suspension with an expulsion. And I'm sitting in his expulsion hearing. He's looking at me and he is crying. He goes, "I'm so sorry I did this." And I'm like, buddy, I'm sorry too, but there's absolutely nothing I can do for you. I'm just here to give the facts of the case. I'm not here to make any decision for you or what happens to you. And I don't know what this boy had in mind in terms of what happens after high school, but if he's going to apply to a college, he's going to have to disclose that he was expelled for threatening great bodily injury or death to a teacher. Is that going to impact his opportunities? I think so. So I made a lot of dumb mistakes when I was a kid. I'm in my mid-40s, and when I went to my high school reunion, most people my age, we're beginning to forget things, which is helpful because no one remembers what I did. But kids don't have that luxury anymore, right? Because everything is memorialized forever. So, and maybe that's my opening question was, why there's too much at stake? Because we don't get a second chance often. Kids are being exposed to extremely dangerous situations, and they don't have the wherewithal or the life experience to make those decisions, and we as parents have to sit down with them and give them the wisdom to deal with these issues, and in some cases filters and blocks and things to keep them from falling into a bad place.
So I said this the last time I spoke at this conference was a couple of years back, and I stick by it, is it's easier to remove a full body tattoo than pull anything that you post on the internet down.
Yeah, there's some doors out there that we shouldn't open, especially in the classroom. If your school, I'm glad to hear you're doing digital citizenship. If your school or district is using collaborative tools, G Suite, Microsoft, make sure your students know the implications of sharing documents. And this is something that even our staff and faculty don't even realize, that we're allowed to share outside of our district domain. We do have kind of that walled garden where the students can work in with their G Suite and Google Apps. But once they share and they can share outside the district, then they're vulnerable and they open up that door. So something to keep in mind is to make sure that students and even your colleagues understand sharing permissions. It's kind of a in the corner of digital citizenship.
Cool. I wanted to give a very quick plug. My team has actually built a digital citizenship curriculum we're rolling out in Q4 that touches on things like collaborative sharing and stuff. It's about 500 pages, so I didn't want to print it out for everybody. But you can use it, remix it. I'll leave my business card and happy to share it with anybody here. Just putting it out there.
Like if we're a Google Apps school, we'll give
It's for everybody?
But I mean, as far as the knowing when it comes out.
Oh, it'll be pretty well publicized, but it's 2 weeks away. But I can share it now. It's done. So, did you have a question over here?
Yeah, I'm just making note of what you just said.
Oh, okay.
I want to share with people, this may be obvious, but kids can have multiple accounts on the same platform. And I said because I do stuff with the government in the security side, and so I will look at places overseas with a different name, right? And so look for GMX, Hotmail. There are quite a few email companies out there that will offer, we don't care who you are. And now these kids can have another email account that you may not know about. And now they have another Twitter account, another whatever account. And so as much as I'm a big fan of behavioral analysis, understanding how you're raising your kids, I think I have a really great 16-year-old. We are very close and so on. It's still, I'm on the fence with OpenDNS, but it's got to be on a person-by-person basis. But I do want to at least share at least that possibility that kids can get separate email accounts. And if you're looking for any signs of how come they're getting gmx.com connections or what have you, that's a great website for free email. If you need that,
Great.
take it out.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have a nonprofit organization and work in several middle schools in South LA. So a lot of inner city issues, and most of what we deal with is conflict resolution, a lot of gang activity on social media, recruitment, or kids just trying to, reach the status quo of what the hip hop culture or the friends say they're supposed to be in. A lot of fights. During lunchtime, for example, as soon as two kids start arguing, you see 100 kids with their cell phones out.
Yeah.
And then the administration says there's so many videos that parents bring to them, they can't keep up with it all. So we spend a lot of time addressing that stuff. But on a more personal level, my son, who's 13, he has a phone. And what I do is I put an app lock on it, and I lock the App Store, Google Play Store. So he can't download any apps, games, or whatever unless he asks me for the password. Do you guys recommend any kind of like parental app, something to that effect, to kind of monitor so your kid can't download anything unless you...
Right. What I referred to earlier, at least on the Apple side, Google has, Android has the same thing called something else, maybe what you just said, but the family sharing, which is built into the iOS of the app devices, it's called Ask to Buy, and if you have a child, you basically set it up with that, and they have to come to you, and again, it's about building the trust, building that communication, and it, maybe really, really savvy teenagers can get around it, but I've been using it since it came out, and it actually works quite well.
Yeah, I highly recommend parents installing some kind of notification filtering type of application. I have one on my children's devices, and it's not something I check every day, but if I wanted to, and usually if I see some behaviors that are concerning to me, that might be when I'm going to be digging a little bit deeper. I like the fact that it does a really good job of filtering beyond my own router. So when they go out and about, are they still protected, etc. So I think it's a great idea. Yeah, the multiple accounts is a huge issue, and some kind of application like that might help you reveal those to you. I like the trust but verify. I think that's the right way to be looking at this. I think it's maybe, you could even look at it as like a training wheels type of idea. I'll put this on here, you prove to me, and then maybe, you don't check it as often, but it's there if you need it. But yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Let me just add.
There are a bunch. So it really boils down to, and I'm actually an Apple guy. However, if I were to advise a parent to get a smartphone for your child, I'd go Android, because those parental notification apps get way inside of the operating system, so you can really see everything. Apple kind of blocks them to a certain level, although it pains me to say it, but I'd buy Android for my child, and I have. Yeah, there are many, and you can spend a lot of money on these. So basically what you need to do is just a little research and homework, and what are the features that you want and how much you're willing to pay for it, and then kind of narrow it down. I'm kind of reticent to name off some, but the one that I've downloaded on my child's device, and that this by no means is like the best one, but it's something I've chosen because it's cost effective, was MM Guardian. The interface isn't great. It's not very graphical in terms, but it gives me a lot of data.
That's not for Apple.
It's for everything, actually. Apple and Android, but the Android version is much more invasive in a good way. Also, there's another one called Parentino that's relatively new, and it's new and it's cheap. So I'm looking as a parent as like, what's the best option for me? It's not going to kill my credit card bill.
I just want to add one thing to that. This should go without saying, but I work with a lot of parents who don't think in this way. So none of this, all of these apps should be behind the child's back. It should be all up front. Again, the idea of the mutual trust and respect. You're teaching them, you're empowering your children to be savvy users. You know, this is not going away. The digital world is not going away. So we want to teach them. So it's not about trust. It's not about whether you trust them or not. It's about having that communication. So it's all, you know, whether they like it or not, and at the beginning they're not going to like it, but, you know, in order to have this adult device, let's not forget, it's an adult device that you're handing to your child, whether it's Android or iPhone.
Yeah, and without that, you end up playing app whack-a-mole.
Exactly.
You know, if they did this conference 6 months from now, that list of red apps would be probably different. So there's constantly new things coming out.
And when I downloaded that app on my kid's device, I actually opened up the parent portal and showed him everything that I can see. I'm like, dude, I can see everything.
Excellent, yeah.
So, you know, and so he's like, whoa, you really can. And I think that's helped bring him to me and say, I made this mistake, because he knows Dad's going to find out.
What question am I asking?
We're getting the cutoff.
Is parent support for safety? What was the question? To get to the information, you said resource.
The resource, I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Well, you gave me 2 apps, but what question am I asking to put in an app for safety?
Well, these apps they do various things. So there was two apps I mentioned, Guardian and Parentino, but these are under a class of applications which are parent notification and filterings.
Awesome. So I'm afraid we are actually out of time. We probably could go on for hours, but I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the panel for taking the time to come here and share their wisdom.
Thank you.
Thanks. And they'll all be around all day, of course, to chat.